Imagine standing in a packed courtroom, watching as a federal judge publicly humiliates a woman claiming to be a veteran. The spectators laugh as he mocks her service dog. Her military record, impossible to verify. Her claims of serving in elite units, ridiculed as fantasy. But then she kneels down and whispers 3 words to her dog. What happens next? Silences the entire room, sends phones up recording, and effectively ends the judge's career in less than 60 seconds. This is the story of Lieutenant Commander Elowen Blackwood, the woman who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary courage and justice. The marble facade of the Eastern District Federal Courthouse gleamed in the early morning light as Lieutenant Commander Elowen Blackwood climbed the steps, her gait betraying a subtle stiffness in her left leg. Unlike the other veterans filing into Courtroom 7 wearing their military decorations like armor, Elowen wore a simple navy pantsuit. The only indication of her service was Artemis, the Belgian Malinois at her side, wearing a standard service dog vest that partially covered the distinctive scarring near the dog's right eye. "Ready?" whispered Dorothea Winters, Elowen's attorney, clutching a leather portfolio containing documents heavily marked with black redactions. Elowen nodded once, her face betraying nothing. Courtroom 7 buzzed with unusual energy. Word had spread that Judge Harlan Prescott was presiding over several veterans' benefits appeals, and his reputation for sorting out the real heroes from the pretenders had drawn spectators and media. The wooden benches were filled to capacity, with a few reporters occupying the back row, their press badges prominently displayed. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harlan Prescott," announced the bailiff, a former Marine, whose eyes lingered suspiciously on Artemis. Prescott entered with the confidence of a man who had never had his authority questioned. At 62, his silver hair and reading glasses projected scholarly gravitas, while the photographs in his chambers featuring himself, alongside generals and senators, established his self-appointed proximity to military credibility. As Elowen's case was called, Prescott peered down at her file with theatrical skepticism. He removed his glasses, cleaned them deliberately with a monogrammed handkerchief, and replaced them before speaking. "Ms. Blackwood," he began, emphasizing the civilian address, "your presence in my courtroom comes with unusual accommodations." His eyes flicked to Artemis, who sat perfectly still beside Elowen. "Your Honor," Dorothea interjected, "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's service animal is certified and legally protected under federal law. All proper documentation has been submitted in advance." Yes, Prescott waved dismissively. "Though I'm not sure what wars this young lady could have possibly seen to warrant such accommodation." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. 2 older veterans in the gallery exchanged knowing glances. One leaned to whisper something to the other, both smirking as they looked at Elowen's back. "For the record," Prescott continued, "you are appealing the denial of specialized medical benefits related to classified operations that apparently no one can verify." He made no attempt to hide his skepticism. "Am I understanding correctly?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elowen replied quietly. "And what exactly makes your case so special, Ms. Blackwood?" Prescott's emphasis on the Ms. was deliberate, drawing another chuckle from the gallery. "My service record includes operations that remain classified, Your Honor. The standard benefit application process does not account for missions that do not officially exist." Prescott removed his glasses again, a theatrical gesture that drew more chuckles from the gallery. A court officer near the jury box unsuccessfully suppressed a smile, catching the judge's eye and quickly composing his face. "Ms. Blackwood claims to have been part of special operations that conveniently no one can verify," he announced to the courtroom, as if sharing an inside joke, "and furthermore claims to have been among the first women in certain elite units that, frankly, would be impossible given military policy during her service years." The laughter grew bolder now. A woman in the front row whispered audibly to her companion, "My brother served 20 years and never met a female SEAL." In the back row, a reporter leaned forward, sensing a story about stolen valor that would write itself. His pen moved quickly across a small notepad, occasionally glancing up to study Elowen's impassive face. Artemis shifted slightly, her training preventing her from reacting to the rising tension in the room. But her eyes never left Elowen's face. The dog's stillness was remarkable, almost unnatural in its discipline. "Your Honor," Dorothea tried again, her voice firm despite the increasing hostility in the courtroom. "The nature of my client's service is precisely why we are here today. Standard vague. Protocols do not adequately address the specific injuries sustained during classified operations. Ms. Winters, this court has tremendous respect for our armed forces and those who serve," Prescott replied, his tone suggesting the opposite of respect for the woman before him. "But respect requires honesty, does it not?" "Absolutely, Your Honor, which is why we have submitted corroborating documentation through proper channels." Dorothea slid a sealed envelope marked "Confidential, Eyes Only" toward the bench. "If you would review these documents, I believe they will substantiate Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's service record." Prescott looked at the envelope as if it contained something distasteful. "This court has seen many cases of exaggerated service claims," he said, pushing the envelope aside without opening it, "particularly recently among those seeking special treatment. The sanctity of our military deserves better than such theatrics." The bailiff approached and whispered something to Judge Prescott, who nodded with a knowing expression. "I have just been informed that your supposed military ID number does not appear in the Standard Department of Defense database," Prescott announced, looking pleased with himself. "How convenient that your entire service record seems to exist in a parallel universe." A man in the second row laughed openly now, nudging his neighbor. The sound seemed to break a dam, and suddenly half the courtroom was chuckling. Even the court reporter glanced up with a skeptical expression. Allowan's face remained calm, but those watching closely might have noticed her right hand had moved slightly to rest on Artemis's back, a gesture perhaps meant to steady herself, rather than the perfectly composed animal. "Perhaps you would like to see my identification, Your Honor?" Allowan asked quietly. Prescott laughed openly now. "What, a blockbuster card with Navy SEAL written in crayon?" The courtroom erupted in laughter. Only Artemis remained utterly still, eyes locked on Elowen, awaiting instruction. "Your Honor," Dorothea interjected, her voice carrying despite the laughter, "my client's service record has been authenticated by the appropriate authorities. The sealed documents before you contain verification from—" "Ms. Winters," Prescott interrupted, "I have presided over hundreds of veterans' cases. I have sons who served, brothers who served, and a father who served. I know what a real service record looks like, and I know when someone is attempting to manipulate the system." He fixed Elowen with a hard stare. "The women who legitimately serve our country in appropriate roles deserve better than those who would claim experiences they never had for personal gain." The laughter had died down, replaced by a tense silence as spectators watched the confrontation unfold. Several nodded in agreement with the judge's words. "Your Honor," Elowen spoke directly now, her voice quiet but clear. "With respect, you have not reviewed the documentation provided." "Because I do not need to," Prescott replied dismissively. "The burden of proof rests with you, Ms. Blackwood, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not sealed envelopes and mysterious whispers about classified operations." He leaned forward. "This court sees right through attempts to exploit patriotic sympathies. Do you have any actual evidence of your supposed service in units that, I remind everyone present, have never officially admitted women during your service period?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the courtroom. The reporter in the back scribbled furiously, clearly constructing a headline about fraudulent valor claims in his mind. Elowen stood silently for a moment, her eyes meeting the judge's. Then, without looking away, she answered, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The simplicity of her response seemed to irritate Prescott further. "Well, we are waiting for this remarkable evidence." The courtroom had grown still with anticipation. Even those who had been laughing leaned forward, curious about what possible proof this unassuming woman could provide. Allowen knelt beside Artemis, her movement fluid despite her injured leg, the motion of someone who had trained to ignore pain. She whispered what appeared to be 3 words, but not in English. "Is she praying to Dog God now?" Someone in the gallery joked, triggering another wave of laughter. Prescott raised his gavel, prepared to call the court back to order and dismiss this waste of the court's time. But he never brought it down. Then it happened. Artemis moved with such precision that it seemed choreographed. The dog pivoted 45 degrees, dropped to a specific stance, then executed a sequence of positions, not tricks, but tactical movements that any special operations K-9 handler would recognize as classified protocols used only in the most extreme extraction scenarios. In the back row, a man in military dress uniform stood suddenly, his face draining of color. The laughter died in waves, replaced by a silence so profound that the click of a cell phone camera seemed thunderous. A court officer who had been smirking moments before straightened his posture involuntarily, his training recognizing what his conscious mind did not yet understand. Elawan quietly removed a specialized identification tag from around her neck, hidden beneath her clothing, and placed it on the evidence table without commentary. The metal made a distinctive sound against the wooden surface, cutting through the silence. Judge Prescott's transformation was instant. His eyes widened at the distinctive markings on the tag, markings he should not have recognized, yet clearly did. His hand, reaching for his gavel, froze midair. From the gallery, a senior military officer in dress blues approached the bench. Colonel Thaddeus Remington moved with the gravity of someone whose presence was rarely questioned, his chest adorned with decorations that commanded immediate respect. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that made everyone in the room sit straighter. "Permission to address the court regarding this matter." Prescott seemed unable to find his voice for a moment. "Granted," he finally managed. Colonel Remington spoke quietly to the judge, but in the perfect silence, his words carried. "Your Honor, I can personally verify Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's service record. Her unit designation falls under Presidential Directive 117-33. He glanced at the dog. "As does Artemis's." Prescott finally opened the sealed envelope with hands that had lost their earlier theatrical confidence. The documents inside bore heavy redactions but clear presidential seals and signatures. He studied them, his face growing paler with each passing moment. "This woman," Colonel Remington continued, his voice carrying deliberately now, "completed 7 deployments with a unit whose existence our government has never officially acknowledged. She is one of only 3 operators to survive the Kashan Valley extraction. The identities of the other 2 remain classified." Throughout the courtroom, phones emerged as people realized they were witnessing something historic, the public confirmation of a female operative in a unit whose existence had been previously denied. The reporter who had been constructing a stolen valor story now frantically typed notes on his phone, his narrative completely reversed. The veteran who had laughed earlier sat motionless, his face a mask of shocked recognition. He had served in Afghanistan, had heard whispers of the Kashan operation, had believed them to be exaggerated myths rather than actual missions carried out by flesh and blood soldiers, certainly not by a woman who now stood quietly before the court. "Colonel," Judge Prescott began, clearly trying to regain control of his courtroom. "While I appreciate your intervention, this court requires proper documentation through appropriate channels." "With respect, Your Honor," Colonel Remington interrupted, something rarely done to a federal judge. "You have the appropriate documentation before you. What you lack is the security clearance to fully understand it." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face flushed red, then drained back to pale. "Commander Blackwood has waived certain protections of classified status in order to pursue the medical benefits she is entitled to," the colonel continued. "She did so knowing the personal risk to her privacy and safety. What she should not have to endure is public humiliation based on ignorance of operations that saved American lives." A young law clerk approached with a phone, whispering urgently, "Sir, the chief judge is calling for you, immediately." Prescott's face had gone from ruddy with authority to ashen with realization. The video of his mockery, followed by this revelation, was already being shared beyond the courthouse walls. He cleared his throat. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Ms. Winters, please approach the bench with your client when we reconvene." As Prescott stood to leave, Colonel Remington turned to Elawan and rendered a formal salute that spoke volumes. Others with military backgrounds throughout the courtroom stood and followed suit, creating a ripple effect of recognition that moved through the gallery. The same veteran who had laughed earlier now stood rigidly at attention, tears visible in his eyes. Artemis remained in position, awaiting the release command that only a Lowen could give. The dog's discipline was as powerful a testimony as any document could be. As Judge Prescott retreated to his chambers, whispers filled the courtroom. The reporter who had planned to write about stolen valor was now on the phone with his editor, his voice urgent as he described what he had witnessed. They exist. The female operators in Kashan. They actually exist, he insisted. One is standing right in front of me, and a full colonel just confirmed it. Dorothea approached Eloin, speaking softly. That was not part of our legal strategy, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Artemis made the decision, Eloin replied simply, finally giving the release command that allowed the dog to relax her stance. Outside the judge's chambers, raised voices could be heard, though the words remained indistinct. Court officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to maintain the pretense that nothing extraordinary was happening. When Prescott returned 15 minutes later, he was accompanied by Chief Judge Eleanor Hargrove, whose presence in a subordinate's courtroom was unprecedented. Her expression was grave as she took a seat beside Prescott. "This court will come to order," Prescott announced, his voice noticeably subdued. Chief Judge Hargrove spoke before he could continue. "In light of extraordinary circumstances, I will be personally reviewing this case. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, Miss Winters, please accept the court's apologies for any unwarranted skepticism regarding your service record." She turned to Prescott with a look that made him shrink visibly in his chair. "Judge Prescott will be recusing himself from all Veterans Affairs cases, pending a review by the Judicial Conduct Committee." The gallery erupted in murmurs until the Chief Judge raised her hand for silence. "Furthermore," she continued, "I am ordering an immediate approval of Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's benefits claim under Special Provision 42. B. Colonel Remington has confirmed the appropriate verification through secure channels." She turned to address the entire courtroom. "I would remind everyone present that, while portions of this proceeding have already been shared on social media, aspects of Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's service remain classified. The court requests discretion from all witnesses, a futile request, as dozens of phones were already transmitting images and video. By nightfall, Eloin's face would be recognized across the country, her privacy forever compromised. Colonel Remington approached Eloin again as the formal proceedings concluded. "Commander, there will be questions from the Pentagon." "Many questions." "I understand, sir," she replied. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. Eloin glanced down at Artemis, then at a small group of women who had entered the courtroom during the recess, women whose bearing marked them as military, whose eyes held the same shadows as Eloin's. "Not just for me," she answered. As they exited the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Eloin moved through them without comment, Artemis clearing a path with her presence alone. The dog needed no commands now. Years of training had prepared her for crowd control and protective escort. One persistent reporter managed to position himself directly in Eloin's path. "Commander Blackwood, is it true that women have been serving in combat roles long before the official policy changed?" Eloin paused, considering. Her silence had protected her for years, had become a habit as ingrained as breathing. But that silence had also allowed injustice to flourish. "American women have served in every capacity needed to protect this nation," she finally said. "Some publicly acknowledged, some not. Today is not about me." "Then what is it about?" the reporter pressed. "It is about ensuring that every person who serves receives the care they earned, regardless of whether their service can be publicly discussed." As she moved to leave, the reporter called after her, "Do you regret exposing your identity today?" Eloin did not turn back. The answer to that question would take months to fully understand, as the consequences of this day unfolded in ways she could not yet imagine. Behind her, Judge Prescott exited the courthouse through a side door, his clerk hurrying alongside him with a phone still pressed to her ear. The expression on his face was that of a man who suddenly found himself on the wrong side of history, watching helplessly as his carefully constructed reputation crumbled. Within an hour, the first articles appeared online. By evening, cable news anchors were discussing the implications of women in previously undisclosed combat roles. Military forums erupted with debates, denials, and first-hand accounts from those who had glimpsed shadows of the truth over the years. A Pentagon spokesperson issued a carefully worded statement, neither confirming nor denying specific operations, but acknowledging the valuable contributions of all service members, including those whose roles have remained classified for national security reasons. For Elowen, the immediate aftermath was simpler and more personal. In a quiet corner of a park 6 blocks from the courthouse, she sat on a bench while Artemis finally relaxed completely, rolling in the grass with an abandon that transformed the disciplined military animal into something resembling an ordinary pet. Dorothea found her there an hour later, holding a stack of messages that had already begun pouring in. The VA administrator called personally. "Your case has been expedited. Treatment can begin next week." "And the others?" Elowen asked. "Colonel Remington is handling it. Every case connected to your unit is being reviewed immediately." Dorothea hesitated. "This is going to change everything, you know?" Elowen watched Artemis, now alert again, tracking the movement of squirrels across the park lawn. Some things needed to change. 1 week later, the headlines told the story that had captivated the nation. Federal. Judge resigns amid investigation into discrimination against female veterans. Pentagon acknowledges women served in classified combat roles earlier than previously admitted. Viral courtroom moment forces military to revise. Benefits process for classified operations veterans. In a private room at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Elowen sat with 4 other women. Each bore the invisible scars of operations that, until last week, had remained unacknowledged. Artemis rested her head on Elowen's lap as a physical therapist outlined a treatment plan that had previously been denied. "They are calling it the Blackwood Protocol now," said Zephyra, a former intelligence operative whose burn scars had been attributed to a training accident for over a decade. "Any veteran with classified service gets automatic review by a specialized panel." "I do not care what they call it," replied Elowen. "I just want people to get the care they earned." Sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the faces of women who had spent years living in shadows. Nairi, whose 3 fingers were missing from her right hand, smiled for what seemed like the first time in years. "Did you see the congressional hearing yesterday?" she asked. "That senator from Arizona demanding to know how many women have served in units that officially do not exist. And the Pentagon spokesperson dancing around the question," added Thalia, the oldest of the group, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to hide the scar running from her temple to her jaw. Some truths are still too uncomfortable for public consumption. Outside the treatment room, news cameras waited. Elowen had declined all interview requests, but the story had taken on a life of its own. Colonel Remington had become the unofficial spokesperson for the hundreds of veterans whose classified service had left them in bureaucratic limbo. "I never wanted to be the face of this," Elowen said quietly, watching a nurse adjust Nairi's medication. "I just wanted my medical bills covered." "Sometimes the most important missions find us," Thalia replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had made impossible choices. "They are not always the ones we volunteer for." Across town, in a wood-paneled conference room, the Senate Armed Services Committee was in its 3rd day of closed-door hearings. Judge Prescott had been called to testify about his pattern of ruling against female veterans. The transcript would remain sealed, but sources within the committee leaked that his answers had been defensive, dismissive, and ultimately damning. His resignation letter had been terse, citing personal reasons for his departure from the bench. But everyone knew the truth. The viral video of his mockery, followed by the revelation of Elowen's service, had rendered his position untenable. Within hours of the courtroom incident, journalists had uncovered a pattern of similar behavior. Spanning decades, as Elowen finally exited the hospital, Artemis at her side, a young female cadet in uniform approached hesitantly. "Commander Blackwood?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. I am at the academy now because you showed it was possible." Elowen nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its importance. She remembered being that young, remembered believing in absolute barriers that could never be crossed. "What is your name, Cadet?" she asked. "Danica Reeves, ma'am." "Cadet Reeves, do not let anyone tell you what is impossible, not even your commanding officers." The girl straightened, her eyes shining. "No, ma'am. I mean, yes, ma'am." As they walked toward the parking lot, They passed a memorial wall where a small section had been newly unveiled, honoring previously unrecognized special operations personnel. The names remained classified, represented only by stars, but the acknowledgement itself represented a seismic shift. Elowen paused, touched the wall briefly, then continued walking. In her apartment that evening, Elowen reviewed the stack of messages that continued to grow. Former colleagues emerging from the shadows, politicians seeking photo opportunities, documentary filmmakers requesting interviews, and, most urgently, a message from the Secretary of Defense requesting a private meeting. Artemis watched from her bed in the corner, eyes tracking Elowen's movements across the room. The bond between handler and dog transcended their military service, had evolved into something deeper than either training or duty could explain. "What do you think, girl?" Elowen asked, holding up the secretary's letter. "Ready to go back into the spotlight?" Artemis tilted her head, ears forward, as if genuinely considering the question. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Dorothea. "The Judicial Conduct Review released their preliminary findings," she said without preamble. "Former Judge Prescott denied benefits to female veterans at a rate 3 times higher than their male counterparts. His legal career is effectively over." "And the others?" Elowen asked, thinking of the dozens of judges who shared Prescott's biases. "The review is expanding. The Chief Justice has ordered an audit of veterans' cases nationwide." Dorothea paused. "This is bigger than we anticipated." "It always was," Elowen replied. "We just could not see the full picture while we were fighting our individual battles." After hanging up, Elowen returned to the window, looking out at the city lights. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman still adjusting to visibility after years of operating in the shadows. Recognition brought its own complications, its own vulnerabilities. 2 months later, a different courtroom. This time, Elowen sat in the gallery as Zafira faced a new judge, one appointed specifically to review previously denied cases. Artemis lay at Elowen's feet, no longer causing whispers or raised eyebrows when she entered federal buildings. Judge Marina Velez reviewed the documents before her with careful attention rather than theatrical skepticism. "The court finds in favor of the petitioner," she announced. "Full medical benefits to be awarded retroactively from the date of initial application." In the hallway afterward, Zafira embraced Elowen, tears streaming down her face. "6 years of fighting," she whispered, "over in 20 minutes. "As it should have been from the beginning," Elowen replied. Colonel Remington approached, his uniform immaculate as always. "Commander, the Secretary is waiting for your answer." The offer to head a new division within the Pentagon, focused on veterans of classified operations, had been unexpected. Taking it would mean stepping fully into the public eye, becoming an official rather than just a symbol. "I am still considering it," she said. "They need someone who understands both worlds," Remington pressed. "Someone who has lived in the shadows but can function in the light." "There are others more qualified." "There are others equally qualified," he corrected. "None more so, and none with your newfound public platform." Back at Walter Reed, in what had become a weekly tradition, Elowen met with a growing group of women whose classified service had left them with unique medical needs. What had begun as 5 had expanded to 15, then 30. They came from different branches, different decades, different operations too sensitive to name, even now. "The Blackwood Protocol saved my life," said a former Air Force captain, showing Elowen scans of a brain injury finally receiving proper treatment. "My headaches are manageable for the first time in 8 years." For Elowen, these moments meant more than the congressional testimonies, more than the meetings with military brass, more than the recognition that had been thrust upon her. These were the victories that mattered. Individual lives improved because one dog performed a classified maneuver in a courtroom. That evening, as she walked Artemis through a park near the Lincoln Memorial, Elowen noticed a group of tourists watching her. Recognition flickered across their faces. One woman nudged another, pointing discreetly. A man raised his phone, then thought better of it and lowered it with a respectful nod instead. Fame was its own kind of classification, Elowen realized. It marked you, separated you, made you simultaneously visible and unreachable. At home, she finally opened the letter she had been avoiding. The Presidential Medal of Freedom nomination had come as a shock. The ceremony would be public, televised, impossible to decline without causing offense at the highest levels. Artemis sensed her handler's discomfort, pressing against Elowen's leg in a gesture of support that required no commands, no training. Just the intuitive bond between two veterans who had faced death together in places that did not officially exist. "We will get through this too," Elowen told her, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Just another mission, right?" 3 days later, Elowen stood before a room filled with the nation's most powerful figures. Cameras captured her image for posterity as the president placed the medal around her neck. The citation carefully balanced classified realities with public acknowledgement, honoring her service while respecting necessary secrets. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood represents the best of American courage and perseverance," the president said, "both on the battlefield and in confronting injustice at home." As applause filled the East Room, Elowen's thoughts were elsewhere, with the women still fighting for recognition, with the veterans still navigating bureaucratic mazes, with the operators still deployed in dangerous places, whose stories might never be fully told. In the audience, Judge Eleanor Hargrove watched with satisfaction. Her decision to personally intervene in that courtroom had set in motion changes that were still reverberating through the system. The judiciary was slowly becoming more responsive to the unique challenges faced by veterans of classified operations. Later that week, a Judicial Conduct Review Committee formally censured former Judge Prescott, ending any possibility of his return to legal practice. The opinion cited a pattern of gender-based discrimination incompatible with judicial ethics, and noted that his actions undermined public confidence in the impartiality of the judiciary. But for Elowen, the most significant victory was not the public humiliation of a biased judge, or even her own vindication. It was the silent change happening in VA hospitals across the country, where veterans like her, whose service had been hidden behind classification, were finally receiving the care and recognition they had earned. Artemis, now officially recognized with her own service record, continued her duties. But these days, when she entered courtrooms or federal buildings, no one questioned her presence or her handler's credentials. Some battles are fought with weapons, others with whispers, but the most important ones are won when truth finally emerges from silence. In her new office at the Pentagon, Elowen looked at the growing stack of cases awaiting review. Each folder represented a veteran whose service had been obscured by classification, whose struggles had been dismissed by bureaucracy, whose voice had been silenced by secrecy. "One down," she said to Artemis, who lay attentively at her feet, "hundreds more to go." The dog looked up, her scarred face alert and ready. Always ready. Outside her window, a formation of Air Force cadets marched past. Among them, more women than ever before, inspired by stories finally being told, doors finally being opened, ceilings finally being shattered. This was the real victory, Elowen thought. Not medals or headlines or vindication, but the knowledge that the next generation would face fewer barriers, would waste less time fighting for basic recognition, would be able to serve their country without sacrificing their dignity. They would still face challenges, still encounter prejudice, still confront systems resistant to change, but they would do so knowing that the path had been cleared, at least a little, by those who came before.